Welcome to the True Sight podcast by Oracle's Elixir, your source for in-depth analytical coverage of professional League of Legends and the rest of the esports world. I'm Tim Magic Sevenhusen, and my guest today is Jensen Goh, the coach of Immortals Academy. How are you doing, Jensen?
I'm doing great. Happy to be in your show. Happy to be talking with your chat, and happy to be giving you the true sight on the True Sight podcast.
Awesome. Yeah, this is going to be good. You've been doing a lot of content, I think, over the past few months, ever since kind of your season wrapped up and then transitioning into the new position with Immortals Academy. And that's been really interesting to watch your kind of strategic breakdowns on your YouTube and things like that. And we'll make sure that there's some links in the show notes for people who want to check out the content you've done and learn from the stuff you put out. But we're here today to talk to you about your coaching experience and your coaching philosophies, what you're planning to do with the Immortals organization. So looking forward to hearing a lot about that from you. So maybe we can start off by introducing listeners to kind of who you are and what you've done, what your footprint is in the League of Legends scene. So then maybe just tell us a little bit about kind of your coaching experience over the last few years. Where have you been? Who have you worked with? Things like that.
Oh, that's actually a whole long list of it. Like just a few days ago, in order to get my visa and submit things, and I needed to write down all the countries that I've been in for the last 5 years, and it's quite a long, extensive list to be honest. I started out in 2017 with this team called Fireball, right? It's another one of those legendary meme icons. It's the fat kid on fire with the gold chain around the neck. The abbreviation was FB as well, so the memes went quite far with that. And that was the start of my professional coaching career. We're gonna count like the semi-professional when we were in the GPL and stuff like that, because that's still kind of considered a major region back then. I was working with the Singaporean teams at that point of time, but my debut in professional coaching in a full-time environment was in the LMS with Fireball. And after that, I went over to the LSPL. Back then, it was still called the LSPL for at least during the NEST period. So I was in China for a short while before I headed over to Vietnam with EVOS, and that was in 2018 when they went to MSI and they went one-on-one with both Fnatic and Team Liquid. After that, I went over to Europe, or rather Spain and Germany, with Spain, with my work in Spain being with the Splice Vipers and with the Mad Lions Academy team, as well as with doing some positional coaching for the main LEC team of Splice back then in 2019. And this year, I spent the first half of the year in Australia with Legacy. And the deal was that for me to go over for one split, set things up, and then they'll run the show for split two in order for them to fit having an assistant coach on the budget. Right, and in the second half of the year, I went back into the what has been now rebranded into the PCS with a Singaporean team, due to COVID constraints. So I was kind of forced back home to kind of run with the team there.
What are just some of the things that you've learned coaching in such a diverse set of teams and a diverse set of leagues? Like, are there really big differences coaching in different locations and different environments, maybe different cultures even?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the culture is definitely the big thing that stands out, right? The way that people handle conflict, the way that people handle criticism, team identity, and all these things. There's just so much to cover when it comes to culture. People usually talk about things in terms of east and west, but even within various parts of the east as well, there's also all sorts of varying cultures, right? I mean, in the east, it tends to be a much more collectivist culture of sorts, so there's a much stronger gravitation to its team identity, towards there being some form of national pride, whereas over in the West it's much more it's slightly more individualistic, and particularly in Europe it was very interesting, right? Because in effectively what's the EU, you have players coming from all over the world, right? I have players from Romania, I have players from Norway, I have players from Denmark that I was working with, and Greek players. I'm sorry if I forgot anybody, right? French players. There's just so many. I can't list out everybody at this point of time. Whereas in the Asian countries, you just work with one group of people, and the LMS is what's about as varied as it gets, right? This like you have people from Taiwan, and then you have the people from Hong Kong, right? And that's about as contrasting as it gets. So like even within navigating these spaces, due to the way that things are brought, the upbringing was, there's various things that you could lean on to borrow persuasive power from. And I think that this was a very key mistake that I made when I went over to China, right? Because I just assumed that yes, Asian cultures are somewhat similar. It's very It's very education focused. It's a lot about structure. It's a Confucian culture at the end of the day, right? So when I went over, I went in there with I wanted to borrow the elements of say a school or a polytechnic or tertiary institution, right? So I went in there with a lecture, tutorial, homework kind of system, and when I went into China, this proved to be a mistake because some of these players I've made the mistake of not doing the groundwork first. So I went in there and not to generalize that say that all players in the LSPL or LPL tend to be this way, but at least for myself, there were a few players who had very bad experiences in school. So when I used such a system and brought it over there, just from my experience in the LMS, having such elements working much better, it turned them against me really quickly because it made me feel that they were their teachers back from school that didn't really do them a big service in terms of trying to develop them as individuals, right? Yeah. Sorry, lost my train of thought and all
No,
of that. So.
that's fascinating. So, were there other environments or other teams that you worked with where that more of a, like a lecturing and like top down kind of a style did work out more?
Wouldn't necessarily was a top-down kind of style, right? It was more of like a recreation of what I felt would be able to borrow persuasive power in terms of implementing the things that I was looking for. So where it would have worked out more, I think if I were to go back and coach within Taiwan, that's something that I might look at doing, and that's something that I'm considering doing as well. In with the academy team and the Immortals, and I have to say I'm borrowing some elements of that at this point of time, where we're in the preseason and we kind of want to start working, but it's a little bit difficult. Like I mentioned at the start, at the top of the show, everybody's in a different place right now. I've got one player in Korea, I've got one player in Greece, I've got one player, some players in Canada, some players in America, and I myself am in Singapore, right? There's just so many time zones and it's so hard to coordinate. So having a much more freer system where I just address something at the top of the day and then give players tasks and assignments to follow through on. So that's a slight adaptation, but not so much for a cultural aspect, but for practicality aspect.
Yeah, okay, that's interesting. So I think you mentioned certain things you've tried that haven't worked that well, and I know you did a really interesting video breaking down kind of some of your most recent coaching experiences and where things went wrong and what you learned from it. What are some of the things on the other side of that you've considered some of your biggest successes? Whether that's like a competitive success, I guess like going to MSI would be one of those, or a personal coaching success, something where you feel like you made a really big difference.
Okay, I think you mentioned MSI, so we can kind of start with that, right? Because Vietnam is at least in 2018 when I went over, it was a very underdeveloped scene. The concept of infrastructure wasn't really in place. People weren't really sure how to run a team. In fact, the young generation story is something that I always tell people, right? Because it's basically five friends who met at a land shop and then they went to Worlds together. Sorry, six friends, right? Because Ren was the coach who was also their friend. So there's before team houses. So in the West and most of the world, people are talking about team houses, people are talking about training facilities, people are talking about nutrition, diet, sleep, and all these sort of things. In Vietnam, it's like, I love League of Legends. Let's play some League of Legends. And then they made it to the World Championship somehow over there, right? So when I went in, the Vietnam scene was very underdeveloped. So for me, it was a kind of a blank canvas to implement what I felt was the right structures in place, right? So it seems like very simple things now, but how do you prepare for a match in terms of band pick? How do you suss up what your opponent's trying to do in terms of doing your scouting, be it in the band pick phase or breaking down what are the level ones that they're doing these days, which is commonplace nowadays, but it's just going in there and saying that this is how you work as a team. The concept of having one-on-ones with players instead of let's just pack our schedule. Okay, we work six days a week. That means we do 2 blocks of scrims every day. That means that we have 12 blocks of scrims, right? To schedule time to do one-on-ones and do individual coaching and training with players, introducing positional coaching ideas over there. And I think that that's more on a structural point of view, and on a tactical point of view, was also helping them adapt at MSI itself to try and figure out and come up with winning strategies against their opponents, right? Because MSI is after my experience at MSI, I realized that how MSI is a very interesting tournament by itself because when you go to MSI, you're playing against the top team from every region, right? So you can't really go there and say that okay, let's scrim a strong team for today and then let's scrim a weaker team for tomorrow, especially
Yeah.
from Vietnam, right? You're one of the weaker teams over there. So we went in there. Back then it was a unique scenario. So we weren't playing in the group stage or the play-in stage. So we went late over to Germany and we only had to play the best of 5 series. So the only team that was willing to scrim us was Flash Wolves. And that was the tournament where Flash Wolves went on that incredible streak at the start of
Yeah.
the tournament itself. So we went like 0-11, 0-12 against them in scrims. It was extremely demoralizing. So I had to come in and I had to show them like, okay, this is what Supermassive is doing. And then at the same time, the players were hearing all these rumors. Yeah, Supermassive, they're going even with Flash Wolves. They're taking games off Flash Wolves. Okay, it's so doomed for us, right? But it was a much different approach towards things for us, because we're not playing to win scrims. We're playing to figure out, okay, what works for us. How do we adapt our play style? We won the VCS that split by simply picking Azir, Sejuani, and Camille every single game. And then the bot lane was Astra Tarek, and nobody banned those champions, right? And neither the Team Liquid, apparently, when we played against them
Yeah.
during the group stage itself. So, um, so it's about trying to figure out, okay, how do we diversify our pool? I do believe Kai'Sa was added to the pool. Zoe was a new champion at the point of time as well. No, wait, Zoe was in the meta for some time already, right? It's just that it saw a buff or something, so
Yeah.
it
It's a
had,
while
it
ago.
had
I
a
can't remember the
resurgence of
details.
sorts, right? Yeah, so it had a resurgence of sorts during the MSI, but the idea was that Kai'Sa was the big champion to play around the point of time. And how do you navigate around then? And the Chinese team, so RNG, they went in there, but they were playing like Cockball and all this kind of things. So what were the answers? And it was a much more structured approach towards things. And I'm not sure if that was the reason why we were able to beat Supermassive, but we were losing every single scrim. So we came in and we said that, okay, this is how Supermassive plays. And at the end of the day, if we understand that these are the core fundamentals of how we should be approaching the game, which is attacking them through the weaknesses of jungle and top, we should be able to win it, right? Because jungle and top were our strengths, as compared to trying to play what the meta was, which is mid and to bot back then, to facilitate a Varus, to facilitate a Kai'Sa.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I think like knowing how to coach through scenarios like that where it's not really going your way and you don't know where your success is going to come from, and still figuring out like, well, here's what we do and it'll give us the best chance to do it. I think there's definitely always going to be a challenge in that. So you're coming into a scenario now where you have coached in kind of LEC and their development system. You've coached in VCS, PCS, and you're coming to North America. You're going to be coaching with Immortals Academy. How do you expect that, or that's going to be different, or maybe you've started to work with the players a little bit already? How do you think that approach might vary from what you've seen before, as you pick up kind of the personalities and culture of the team that you're working with now?
I think the team that we have on the academy roster for Immortals is a team that I'm very happy to work with. Right, this is a team that I spent countless nights I screwed up my entire sleep schedule just to have the chance to interview, to talk to all these players, talk to the previous teammate and stuff, and really figure out, right, like what's and do a projection and profiling as to what we think we can provide as staff to help them succeed in the future as well. So what are the differences that I'm expecting? Right, sorry, what are the differences that I'm expecting? Right. Um, I think firstly, that's the caveat, right? That this is an academy team of sorts, and we can move into the semantics of what academy means and why does this frame it in a very interesting manner within NA itself. Whereas in Europe, I was technically working with the Mad Lions, which is the Mad Lions Madrid, and I was working with the Spice Vipers during my time over there. So there was also a tier 2 team of sorts, but over there we have the
The
EU
European regional leagues,
Masters,
yeah,
right?
and EU
Yeah, they
Masters.
had the ERLs to play for, right? So it's the Superliga Orange for the Spanish league that we were playing in, and then if you won that, you would then qualify for EU Masters. And the shift between while the teams, they can substitute players between the main team and the academy team, is a lot less heard of as compared to any, where I think like just last year within the same org itself, right? Immortals, they just moved the whole academy team into the main roster, and there's so many stories of this happening, especially towards the mid to lower table teams, and things aren't working out. You would then look at the academy roster. And I think this is something that people have brought up as well, as the challenge of running an academy roster in NA, where if you're doing well on the academy team, you will have your players plucked out from it and put onto
Yeah.
the main team to replace a weaker piece of sorts.
Yeah,
Now,
and
this is something
Immortals
that,
specifically has quite a bit of history with that in the past couple of years,
yeah, precisely,
moving
right?
players between Academy and LCS.
So it's something that we have to have a high level of consistency between what we're doing on the main team and the academy team in order to facilitate. So should we be looking at the academy team, which is interesting, right? Because like if you say it's academy team, then you expect it more to be like what they do in Europe, where you rarely see people take players out from academy into the main team itself. Where what we see in NA is effectively this academy team is used more like a reserve set, right? which is also the interesting thing comparison between esports and sports. Because in sports, like let's say you have a football, or I think you guys call it soccer here, right? You have I think it's like 30 over players registered on the team roster, the 30 or 32, something around that, right? And then you have 11 players who are playing on the pitch itself, of which you have 4 substitutes that are, I think, 4 to 6 substitutes that you have available directly on the bench within the match itself. So you have this ability to rotate, and there's a certain level of redundancy. So somebody is not performing well, somebody gets injured, or there's physical limitations because you have to travel between spaces for matches due to the tight schedules. There's always a certain level of redundancy within that. Within sports teams, whereas in esports it's always okay. These are your 5 players, right? And very rarely you have a 6-man, or you have a substitute who's actually rotating with the rest of the team, or you have a substitute because you have to reflect somebody that this is someone where we might need someone to step in for at certain points of time in the year. And then you have the academy team, which fills in this purpose of redundancy, right? Which is not a true academy team, because it's effectively it is effectively a reserve squad in this case.
Yeah. No,
sorry, I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that. Right?
It definitely makes a difference, though. Right? I think like something that we could seize on a little bit there is if you're having to train the academy team in a way that you're always keeping in your mind, these players need to be ready to move up into the LCS team and sub in there if it's needed, whether because they've earned it with their own play and we want to give them a shot, or the player at the LCS level is maybe struggling a bit and needs to come down for a bit and kind of regain some confidence, whatever it is. Then you need to be synchronizing your coaching style and like the systems you're teaching, like, hey, what is this position's role in our communication system? What is this position's, how important is it to be able to roam versus stay in lane in certain timings, like even things like that, system to system. So is that something you've already been working with the LCS coaching staff on, and like agreeing on your systems you're going to be using and all of that?
It's a work in progress, definitely. I think it's a little bit too early to say that these are systems that we're moving forward with. You never know, there might be a patch 2 months from now, and then it says, okay, League of Legends is now a 6-man team game, right? And that's the nature of playing any online game with a 2-week patch cycle. So that's definitely a challenge that we have to work with. And I think that when it comes
only the supports can copy and paste in chat. So any of your mid laners who type flash timers, you're not allowed anymore.
Oh, yikes.
I mean, it is interesting though, right? Like trying to figure out those systems, and I'm sure that's a thing that the next month or so is going to be a lot of feeling that out and seeing how it's going to land. I think maybe this is a good time to talk a little bit about before we dive a little deeper in how you coach and what kind of structures you like to use. Who your actual team is and the players you're going to be working with, because I think that influences a lot of how you approach it, right? So the academy roster you guys lined up with was Tapoon, Potluck, Pretty, Keith, and Joey. So there are some names here people might be familiar with, some they might not be so familiar with. Maybe you could just give us a quick rundown of who these 5 players are, and I guess to whatever extent you had a role in actually selecting who joined the team. Maybe give some insight there.
Sure. Let's just start off by saying that I had a very active role, and what Andre told me that this is my team. He gave some suggestions here and there, but at the end of the day, he gave me a broad stroke requirement: is that we were looking for high level of parity, and we were looking for and the timeline, right, for development of sorts, which is what were the big criteria that we're looking at when we were selecting these players. So the in terms of timeline, let's talk about having a 2-year plan, right? Within 1 year, we wanted, whichever between the main team and the academy team, we needed to have exciting pieces that excited people to work with. And that's something that people don't realize, right? When they always say that, okay, why don't we give more rookies a chance and stuff like that? Because at the end of the day, not only do we have to piece together a roster that's exciting for the fans to watch, during the process of piecing together a roster, it's also important for us to be able to excite players that we're trying to attract. So I think that it's kind of public information now that Immortals, we have been quite publicly snubbed by some players that we were so-called front runners to sign, right? And I think some for the LCS team, some for the academy side. So it's quite clear that what a pecking order is that there's always the hotter, prettier, sexier team that players would prefer to go with, because they can tell them that, hey, look, we have these players, or at least they can go up there and say that, okay, hey, look, we are in talks with these players, and these players might be coming on board with us, and you might be part of the package. So would you be interested in signing with us so that we can make this happen? Whereas for us, we weren't really in a position to sell them the allure of playing with the likes of Perks
Yeah.
or Sword Art or Alfari, who are kind of like the marquee and big name, big ticket signings that was happening
Yeah,
this
and
offseason.
you can see like pretty clear examples of teams having to make hard choices around that. If you look at another org, for example, like Dignitas, and they sold Johnson to FlyQuest, and one of the big, I think that's one of the big stories there is they had 1 year left on Johnson's contract, and they had to look at themselves and decide a year from now or over the next course of the year, are we going to be able to convince him to sign back with us again, or is if we don't sell him now, is he just going to walk for nothing because we think we're not going to be able to convince him that we're the right place for him to be. And so, as an org, you don't want to set yourself up in that position where you're going to be losing your resources because they'd prefer to play somewhere else. So that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, interesting to know that was a factor in how you guys built out your academy team as well.
So for us, the appetite for risk was definitely a lot lower. And sorry, there's a third factor as well, which is that because of how uncertain this entire year has been, because of the uncertainties of COVID, even though there's like a quarantine on the horizon, in the immediate horizon right now, we needed to be able to field a roster that could play in the LCS immediately, right? So if visas were delayed, we needed, between the academy roster and the main team, we needed players to be able to play. Back then was by the second week of January. So that was the third factor that I was given in terms of piecing this roster together, right? And Mike, if you're listening to this, you're watching this, if I say anything that I'm not supposed to, sorry, because more is coming.
Yeah, cool. So the 5 players you've got, again, you got Tapoon, Potluck, Pretty, Keith, and Joey. Give us the sales pitch on this. Why should we be really excited about these 5 as an academy roster? Get us hyped.
So there's 2 ways to think about development, right? And I think people are always setting a lower bar and like saying that we are trying to develop people to be LCS ready in academy. But here there's a different perspective because of the way where we have to say that this is not just a training school to develop young talent. It's effectively what doubles as a reserve squad in traditional sports, right? And these are my words. I can't speak for what Andre or Giolotto sees all of this as, right? So for us, is we are bringing pieces where I felt that they are 1 or 2 steps away, and I felt that by doing the profile, sorry, let me just run you guys through the process. So when we're looking at each player, we did a physical profile. So this involves their age, injury history, and where they are, if they're in pulse status and stuff like that. We did an in-game profile that looked at the eye test of how well they play in game. What's the overall profile of this player? Is this player more a team player, and how does he synergize with, say, an overarching structure that we want to play for? And then the third is we did a psychographic profile, right? Which is my term for it, but I'm pretty sure I've used it wrongly here, where we examine what the player's personality is like, and will he be a good culture fit for the team and what we're trying to do over here. So this was the thought process when we went into building this roster, and based on these factors, we did a 2-year projection of sorts to figure out, okay, within 1 year, would they not only be LCS ready, but would they have a good chance of being a championship contending piece, right? And this doesn't necessarily mean that this has to be a guy who's going to be a hyper carry, right? He doesn't have to be a star piece on the team. But if you look at the World Championship, right? Players on this team. Ghost is also a championship contending piece of sorts, even though he's not the key piece of Showmaker, Canyon, and Nuguri on Diamond Gaming. And the same can be said about Huan Feng for the AD carry position on Suning as well. Not the central piece. Angels, the same story as well. So we're looking at players who can not only just pull their weight, but will also be assets within their lane. So there's star carries, there's assets, and then there's like role fillers and serviceable players. So there's 3 tierings that we're looking at. So we're not only looking at how can we have LCS ready players, but we're looking at how can we have people who are assets in their position, who will be assets in their position by the end of 2021, because that was what the criteria we're looking at. So to start going off the names, right? So Topun, he has already played roles, and I think that he's usually the where people err on the side of caution when they approach imports from Korea in general, which unfortunately Topun is, despite having played his entire career in Oceania, is that he has already played his entire career in Oceania, right? So I can't actually tell the story in the PG rated stream, but he swears in English rather than in Korean, right? So instead of hearing the usual Korean swears, he would actually say the C words and stuff like that, which I'm not sure if I'm selling him in the best picture right now, but that to me is the testament of his adaptability to its English speaking culture, as compared to some of the Korean imports in the past who have had a difficulty navigating cultures, right? And he has played his entire career in Oceania. He's friends with many of the mammoth players who came over in the end of 2019, and obviously he was in Legacy that I coached this year, and all 5 Legacy players actually will be in NA for next year as well.
Mm-hmm.
So as to the testament of his strength, which is he's already played of roles. We saw him, his laning phase was decent. And I actually felt that he wasn't able to showcase the full range and the true capability of his abilities at roles, right? So he had decent performance over there. And there was some errors here and there, especially the first game against IMTZ, because apparently he has some setting issues with his keyboards and with his keyboard and stuff. But when we watched it, it was consistent. And this is a player that, despite having to play away from the Asian servers, which is usually another very big factor in these coordinate pods being able to maintain the level of skill. He's somebody who has been able to play in Oceania, which is a much weaker solo queue environment.
Yeah.
Not to flame them, but of course, compared to Korea, everything else is a much weaker solo queue environment. He has been able to maintain a very strong level of play, right?
Okay, so let's stop. Now, Potluck and Jungle is somebody that you guys have retained from 2020, and seemed like he was developing fairly well across the year. So, what's exciting about Potluck? What are you looking forward to with him?
I think Potluck was the one piece that was match made for me, right? Because I believe that Potluck was announced before it was announced, and Potluck was there before I joined the team. And what I was told by Mark Clips is that he brought me on because he felt that I was somebody who he seemingly worked on Splice Vipers, and he said that I was somebody who brought a lot of structure, was able to boil things down to core principles and basic fundamentals for players to then transform into your own and build upon, right, after giving him a solid foundation. And he told me that Potluck would be a very good match for my coaching style. And the way that I've interacted with him as well, this is the guy who shares a lot of the core beliefs and core principles I have when it comes to players that I enjoy working with. And I think that players that can succeed as well, as in terms of how deliberate, how self-aware, and how systems oriented he is, right? He's somebody who places a lot of effort into the out-game aspects as much as he places into the in-game aspects.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very pleasantly surprised to know that really in terms of like the good habits, good learning habits, he has got quite a fair bit of it. So Pollard I was told that he would be a very good fit for my coaching methodology, and from what I've seen so far, it definitely is adding up, right? The emphasis on quality instead of emphasis on quantity, and the high focus on making sure that there's a holistic approach to self-improvement rather than let's just play lots of solo queue, let's just try to get good at only the in-game aspects of League of Legends, because there's four big domains when it comes to self-improvement, right? There's the in-game knowledge domain, there's the relationships and dynamics domain, there's the out-game performance domain, and then there's the systems domain of it. And he's somebody who is aware of these various domains and is actively working to improve himself in these areas.
Yeah, cool. No, that sounds it's always very important for these younger players especially to be able to approach things systematically and be like self-reflective and understand here are the right ways to improve and not just go out there and hope it works and kind of spam a bunch of games kind of thing. Pretty as a player, I don't know a whole lot about. What can you tell us about him?
So Pretty is he's one of the top players in the ERLs, right? And I think that this is where a lot of this narrative about we gotta find new, exciting, and young and fresh talent, I think does him disservices. And I think it's also the way that he plays, or rather his preference, right? So Pretty is when I worked with him on the Mad Lions, we characterize him as this is a Doan B style of player, right? But you look at him and he's not gonna be he's still a strong laner, right? Like Doan B is still a strong laner, right? It's just that people give him flack for not being the best laner as compared to Rookie. But if you had to rank people in terms of like who's the best laner in China, people do Rookie number one, and then somewhere down the line, then you're doing P, right? But there's all these intangibles that you bring to the table, and this stuff, understanding of the game that he also brings to the table as well. So Pretty at the end of 2019, he kind of like fit the category, and I think that that's something that could be more underappreciated. Of course, I can't speak for the European coaching and scouting staff, right? But this is just my gut feel on it, and this is something that where when we were still looking at his performances on Giants, and from what I heard as well from insiders over there, is that he's somebody who's actively able to short call and coordinate plans, and is somebody who's very in tune with what I call the modern day League of Legends macro, which is a topic that takes quite a fair bit of time to learn. So having Pretty be able, as someone who already understands that, I think it's a very very valuable asset, especially when working in NA, which is a region that I think is a little bit lacking. in
Yeah,
this
and
area.
in that mid lane area, that kind of dynamic. I think we've come a long way since the days of kind of the classic Froggen video. I don't understand why Hyde goes roaming and gives up all the CS to go get a kill that's not worth as much gold in the silence kind of like we've come a very very long way since then. In understanding what it means to play the map, to play outside of your lane and things. So yeah, absolutely agree that that's important to get in players, especially mid laners who understand that well. Um, Going into the bottom lane, we've got Keith and Joey, two names that are relatively familiar, being around kind of in the NA scene, in and out for a while on various kind of levels of it. What would you say to people who might look at players like that and say, I don't understand why they're in academy, they might be past their peak, or maybe they're already at their peak and don't have anywhere to improve from here. Like, how do you approach that kind of feedback or that kind of perspective?
Well, I mean, I've kind of given my calculus, right, as to what the approach to resolve this was. At the end of the day, we're not here to give in to Reddit narrators. In that case, you know what, just give Reddit my job instead, right? And then let Reddit narrators say, okay, what's trending? Let's use our social listening tools to determine what's popular in terms of building an academy team today. Young players who is 17 years old, and that can be their primary scouting criteria instead. But okay, let's talk about so when it comes to like working with players who have had tenure, right, and this is where I also lean into my strengths and my ability to work with players in the past. Most of the time I've worked with players who have already had some period already developing in the space, and I'm coming in and I'm saying that and I can identify that these are the one or two steps or one or two aspects that they are lacking at this point of time, and I either help them find band-aids around that, or help them feel that in terms of like individual coaching as well. So this is where I've been able to get quite a fair bit of value out of players who have had some time in the scene in itself, because you have to understand that when it comes to developing players, right, it's not opening a gacha box and it's like, yep, let's click on this player. It's like playing those gacha games, right? You click it, you start it, and then the box opens in 1 hour and stuff like this. It's a very active process of working together with them and trying to figure things out. Over here in Asia, most of the time players spend about one split in as a trainee and about one full year to develop as to where they are, right? You look at Bin, who was like the breakout rookie at Worlds this year. He spent one entire year on the Suning Academy team, and I'm not sure if he spent more time as a trainee over there as well in China when he was even younger than that. And then he had to spend half a year where the team was kind of like floundering around. And when we went into Worlds, he was a strong player, but you still wouldn't say that this is a complete player, right? Like Ornn is still missing from the champion pool. He did play one game of Ornn, but the way that he was building, the way that he was playing the champion, it was clear that this is not a champion that he has a lot of understanding of at this point of time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at the development processes, the question is, at which stage of the development process are we looking to pick players up in? And even then, it doesn't mean that after 1.5 years, then the players cap out, right? It doesn't mean that they
Yeah.
cap out and then that's it. So when it comes to like players who have had some time in the scene, we can look at it, right? It's not like Keith has just been playing AD carry in the North American scene for like 7 years now, and he's always like just 500 LP challenger. It's like not impressive, not terrible, and he's always like coasting through things. He's made finals of Academy. He's consistently top of the ladder in the NA itself. And when he went to Korea and boot camp twice, although I know it is the off season in Korea when they went over the boot camp, he made challenger on AD carry, and he was close to challenger playing support as well. And being able to do that on two different roles, I think is testament to his ability, his mechanical ability, right? And if you're looking at an AD carry, mechanical ability is definitely the most one of the most important factors for it. So there was a very strong argument for us when we looked at Keith, despite him having had this much time in the scene. And you can't have it both ways, right? You can't say that players are capped out. You can't criticize any staff for having poor development in the past. And I'm not going to say that it has to be one or the other, but rather this is my confidence in my ability to, as someone who has consistently worked with these players, where we can say these are the one or two key factors, right? In this case, if we say there's consistency with Keith, then this is what I'm going to be trying to help him to provide him, so that he can not only just be LCS ready. I would say that Keith is already kind of like at its base level, he is already an LCS ready prospect, but he's somebody who can be an asset moving into the rest of the year and by the end of 2021, right?
Sure. Yeah. And what about with Joey then, a player who has been a little more kind of in and out of the scene, right? And has dropped below the academy level at times and was, earning his way back into the scene, right? Like, is that somewhere where you kind of look at the curve they've gone through at the level they've been playing at and say like, this guy's been here before, but he's on the upswing again. We're going to try to like unlock a higher level for him. Like how do you approach a player like him?
Yeah, I think that you could say that he's on the upswing, right? And I think that when it came to scouting grounds, there's a few players that caught my eye. I think it's once again public information. Tony Top was the person that we first picked in the draft, so Tony Top was the standout player at scouting grounds for us. But it was actually kind of a surprise to us that Joey didn't get drafted despite winning the event with Team Motion, and he had actually some very interesting um, uh, sorry, I forgot what I was going to say. He had some very interesting scenarios, right, where he was blind picking Lulu and having the confidence to do that at Scouting Grounds. Now, definitely Scouting Grounds is a much lower level of players compared to the likes of the LCS or even say the academy scene in general. But to see a player be willing to do that, be able to execute, and through the player interview with him and being able to listen and watch his comms, once again, it ticked off a lot of the boxes when it came to doing the eye test and says that, and this is just me saying that I'm confident that I should be able to develop this player as well into an asset, right? Because he's communicative, his mechanics and hands for the game are not bad as well. He's not like completely missing skill shots, and he has a decent understanding of how to play to play lane matchups. It's just about providing the framework in which he can develop the understanding further.
How important is it when you have a pair of players like that? And I'd say across your roster in general, there's a decent amount of experience across this roster. When you have an academy team and you're trying to develop all these players, how important is it to have like these veteran players who can act as leaders or mentors or kind of examples of how to be a pro? How does that play into a team and the way you set it up?
So I think that the veteran dynamic is one that I don't really subscribe to, right? At the end of the day, it's my job as a coach to provide that development and leadership for them, and to provide the environment for in-game leadership, right? To provide the right structures and environment for in-game leadership as well. So in fact, that people always say that yes, we should be there always has to be this mix of rookies and veterans for the veterans to be the big voice in the team, but that isn't necessarily always going to be the case, right? If you were to ask me, I would always prefer that the jungler and support be the ones to do it. And in this case, if it means that if it's a younger player doing it, I think that especially outside of the East, where things are less dogmatic in terms of like you have to respect a certain seniority to certain things as well. It just makes more sense to have a jungler and support be the main callers in the team and be able to coordinate things, especially given the systems that I do teach teams in general as well. So yeah, when it comes to like having veteran leadership, yes, that's definitely very valuable, right? Like I mentioned earlier, like Pretty is someone who understands really who understands much better how to play the modern game of League of Legends as compared to what you see. A lot of people subscribe to, where it's about picking the scaling mages and then getting to two items and then team fighting around them as a core carry so the mid lane today is a secondary resource that the team can use on top of the jungler to make plays happen to then enable your game plan, be it stacking drakes or breaking one of the silent darts so that you can then enable a way to attack the rest of the map.
Yeah, so I think you can talk about the in-game leadership on this, and I understand where you're coming from there, and not necessarily needing the veterans to be the shot callers or things like that, and who's making the decisions or kind of leading the choices in game. When we speak about leadership outside the game, though, right? We're talking about how do you handle a loss? How do you handle a win? How do you deal with kind of communication and like the players giving each other feedback or helping each other receive feedback from the coach, things like that, like kind of the example of how to be a player in a pro scene outside of the actual in-game actions. How does their level of former experience as a pro kind of play into that? And is that somewhere where you see that you agree that you usually want to have one or two of these players who have been around for a while and kind of know what it's like to work in this pro team environment? So like again, just speaking specifically in the kind of the out of game aspects of this.
Sure. I think it's not a must, but rather it gives you more tools to work with, right? So there's a lot of power in storytelling. So when you get players to share the stories, to share the experiences, and sometimes I don't have to get them to do it, right? If they already have such experiences, they've seen similar things before. Most of the time, players will speak up, and through these stories, it actually forms quite a compelling argument to either rally the team in one direction, or sometimes it actually can move the team in the wrong directions as well. So there is aspects of it that you have to manage. It's just a question of what you're getting with the player, what their experiences are, right? So this is one of the factors that we had as well when we're interviewing with these players. Like, is there going to be lots of bad habits and bad experiences that we have to be watching out for, and that we have to help them unlearn some of these things if we are going to be trying to develop them as veterans as well. And I think that this is where I wouldn't say it's capped, right, but it's a different approach towards certain things as well. So when it comes to like if they learned the wrong macro systems and under a certain coach, like when I was working in Taiwan, I had one of the players tell me that, oh, you're supposed to ward first before you push out the waves, right? Which is the wrong order of things. Because you always push out the
Yeah.
waves first, you see open, answer the wave first, and then you go and ward. But what he was taught previously was that his coach told him that you always have to ward first so that you then would know it would be safe to push out the wave. So this is something that it had been ingrained to him for 1 year already, for over 1 year. So he was a jungler, right? So as a jungler, he was doing this. And I had to help him unlearn this bad habit and then relearn the new habits
Yeah,
of
no,
waiting
that
for the
makes sense.
team, coordinating, linking up with your support, and then pushing together to cover for your AD carry to push out the wave, and then moving together as a unit to establish the wards. So
Right.
there's certain aspects of these things that you might have to work with as well with veterans, right? And there's an in-game example for out-game examples as well. They might have come from a very toxic team, and there's something that I talked about in my time working with the PCS team this year, right? Because they were effectively first time playing in a professional full-time environment, and before that it was always big fish small pond syndrome, where it was about if you wanted to be playing on the top team in Singapore, where there was a fair bit of financial incentive to be in, it's entirely player run, right? So it's all about community narrative. It's entirely player run. So
Mhm.
when somebody is foolish enough to step up and say, "Okay, sorry guys, I think that this series we lost because it was my fault. I could have done these things better." Oh, confidence scapegoat under the bus you go, and guess who's not on the top team next year,
Yeah.
making that sizable amount of cash winnings, right?
Yeah.
So for them, they're ingrained in a very negative sense where showing weakness was not good, right? Confrontation was bad because they knew that these behaviors were bad, but they weren't able to address it in a very direct manner. So when it
Sure.
came to like receiving criticism, they always would take things very personally. They would always try to deflect things off to somebody else, and even as something as simple as like as a coach, my question is always going to be, how can we do this better? And they never got to that. It's always about, oh, there's a problem here, and they would just be so fixated because of their past experiences on, okay, who should I be blaming now, or rather, if it really was their fault, then they would be so caught up in the pain of the emotion within the moment. So that's something that you have to watch out for as well. Like you
Yeah,
have players who have in quote unquote a baggage, right?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and so you're gonna have players who come in with sometimes they have good examples to model after having been around a while. Sometimes they have bad examples to model, and yeah, I'm sure it's interesting to kind of parse through all of that. So let's get into the weeds a little more together. Let's talk about your approach to coaching some of these things. And I think we've heard a little bit about the way you might explain a macro concept to a player, or things like that, or whatever else that is. What are some of the things that you expect, with the players that you're going to be working with? What kinds of things do they need to learn? What level do you end up coaching them at first? Are you teaching them how to play out certain matchups? Are you teaching them macro concepts like, hey, push the waves before you ward? Are you teaching them certain communication systems? What level do you usually see these guys come in at?
So as the level that we're coming in yet, we haven't had a chance to do a proper diagnostic as to figure out where we are at yet, right? So the first thing I do with every team that I have the chance to join is that we spend 3 to 4 weeks where we would just learn. So the way I modeled the game of League of Legends, so some people model it around the number of lanes you play on. I modeled it based on the style of team fight, right? So there's all in team fightings where you want to play for neutral objectives. There's pick and disengage, which is a lot more similar to the way that G2 has been playing, a lot very similar to the way that Flash was playing, where you play actively on 2 lanes and you collapse with manpower advantages to off 2 lanes to create picks and take objectives. And then there's the kite and re-engage, right? Which is Genji, right? They play Astra, they play Yumi, they play Azir, and what do? Wrestle and sleep for 30 minutes. 3 items. Yep, Yumi's online, Azir's online, Azir's online, right? So there's kind of 3 ways to play the game, and then I would run a diagnostic with this team to see how proficient they are at each of these things. And because this is academy, this is there is an aspect of development. So we have to spend some time like learning each of the styles, so that even if they're weak in one style, they're able to pick that up to a serviceable level. To a serviceable level first, and then we talk about
Mhm.
specialization into one particular trend, right? And as to what direction that goes with, this is where the dynamic comes in, where it is not my job to determine what the direction is, and something that we will have to look to the LCS team to say that this is the direction that they want to move with, and then for us, we have to reflect that in the way that we're
Mhm.
practicing and trading as well, so that we are ready to go if need be, right? Sorry, I your question was how do I teach players? Was it?
Yeah, I mean, generally just speaking about that, and I think different levels of it. So I think what you've been describing here is, kind of macro approaches to the game, like basically understanding win conditions, right? We have this style of team comp, and it wins when we play out, when we position ourselves in the map here, when we go for these kinds of engages, whatever it is, so that's one level that you can coach the players at, teaching them how a team comp works and how to build the right kind of team comp and how to use that team comp once you have it. But I guess also understanding how you teach other things like more micro oriented, like matchup knowledge kinds of things, like teaching them a communication system, who's responsible for communicating what things, how you kind of maybe a little bit about what the hierarchy is of teaching those things.
As to which is the most important, is it?
Sure.
I would usually start with identifying win conditions, right? So the styles of macro for gameplay. Then based on that, I'll probably move on to it has to be a two-pronged approach, right? Because you have to be fixing laning at the same time. So for us, we have a certain level of positional coaching that we will be implementing on our side. So Malaclips is somebody who's known for having lots for knowing the top lane very well, and Ivan somebody who has worked. So when we were both working on Spice, he handled the top lane, I handled the bot lane, and then we will be bringing somebody to handle mid jungle as well, or I might be moving over to handle mid jungle for this year, depending on what Nightshare's preference is, right? Be it handling mid jungle or handling bot lane. So there's a certain level of positional coaching that will be working in all of this, in there being like a two-pronged approach of sorts. And this is similar to what I did. I'm not sure if you had the chance to sit in when I was running reviews for Scouting Grounds, right? Where you have a team review and then you cover the big points for team points, and then you have individual reviews that cover individual things. So at this point of time, yes, we're not scrimming at this point of time. So it's about developing how can we start learning things in this preseason without having the opportunity to scrim. Then it's more macro focus. It's more focused on like the bigger aspects of things. It's focused on like developing small habits. Like when if I have the chance to watch and disturb Joey while play solo queue, I'll just be there. It's like time your timer. It's like this guy Flash, time the timer, right?
Yeah.
And there's also then I run lectures and lessons with them to focus on like we did a vault review earlier today, but it focuses on like the macro aspects of how to play a specific dragon setup, right? We're watching some of the games from Worlds. They said this is what the meta is like, and this is how you can play in this specific scenario. So I wouldn't really say there's a hierarchy, because a lot of these style things is like a needs-based thing. So sometimes I have a big syllabus at the start of the day, which is learn, okay, week one, we learn all in team fighting, right? We play the stack tricks. Then as to what are the details, what's the shot calling, how do you communicate within that, then we problem solve and tackle based on what's already lacking. Especially for this team, there's going to be already a predetermined understanding of how these players want to be approaching the game. So there's going to be some level of de-conflicting ideas as well within that.
No, that makes sense. When you're specifically talking about developing players, how much do you go in and say, here is, like the textbook approach, I guess, basically, like, here are the different chapters of things that I want you to know, and we're going to go through each of them, make sure that you are strong in each of these areas, versus getting to know the player and what they already understand and just like filling in gaps and trying to like identify strengths and weaknesses and work with those? Like, do you usually come in more with a pre-existing idea of what they need to know, or more with, let's start with them and then work on top of what they already have?
So there has to be a pre-existing prescription of sorts so that you can bring everybody onto the same page, right? And this is the famous story that I tell when we were running the 10-man. We ran a 10-man roster on the Mad Lions, right? Because they merged with the Spice Vipers at a point of time. So we had two academy teams merging into one. And what happened was that it was their call for management side to run it as Team A and Team B. So it wasn't a true 10-man roster, and then it got Team A competing against Team B. And Team A was coached by Alvar, Team B was coached by myself. So it created a scenario where some of these players would get coaching from Peter as well, because they approached things. They approach him for lessons and stuff. So we would learn. There was this concept called there was this term called the fast rotation, right? I call it fast rotation. For me, it was a very specific thing that you did in the early game, which was where the mid laner would drop the mid lane wave, let the jungler pick it up, and he would rotate bot to dive bot, right? So if you're like LeBlanc, you hit your level 6 spike, you have ultimate available, bot lane's level 4 still, you just drop the mid lane wave, you walk bot, and you pick up 600 gold for yourself, and then the jungler will pick up the mid lane wave, and that was my idea of a fast rotation, right? And then there was different ideas of what a fast rotation was. Was it the way that you rotated between the lanes, like where you skip vision, so it was therefore a fast rotation, or was it the setup that G2 does, where you build off two lanes and then you collapse on one side of the map and does a fast rotation? So it came to a point where after we merged back the two teams for the playoffs for the SL itself, nobody knew what fast rotation meant anymore.
You're using the same terminology to mean different things, and now what?
Right. So it's about making sure that when we have a player at the start of things, there has to be some level of prescription, right? To say that this is the terms, this is what's going to be happening, so that people get on the same page. Then from there they can take things, and then we can fill in gaps accordingly. So there has to be a base level to say that this is the systems that I expect. This is how I want us to think about the game, right? So if the players are going to be working with me, for me is I model the game by what is the approach towards team fighting, right? As compared to what lanes we are playing on. Right. So if they're working with me, then we will be thinking about the game in terms of, okay, we look at the compositions at the start, and then the analysis will start with who outscales, what kind of team fight are we looking for, and then the rest of the flowchart would then come into play. And how they want to take the flowchart would then be up to them. But it always has to start with what is the team fight mode, and then we structure the game around that accordingly.
Okay, cool. That's pretty interesting. And I'm sure people want to learn a little more about kind of specific ways that you coach or the way you would teach some of these concepts. Again, you've got some YouTube videos up and things like that. People can learn a lot more about that. So looking ahead to 2021 and the team that you have, and I think you've referred to this a little bit, but maybe just to kind of wrap it up a little more cleanly, what would you consider as success for your team and for the players that you're working with over the course of 2021?
Well, I mean, the simplest way to do it, and this is going to be like, actually, this is kind of difficult to answer, right? Because it's a very unique and interesting perspective. Like I said at the start of things, was the goal for us is to develop an exciting set of players that people at the end of the day would be excited to work with, right? So be from the academy side, and then we can say that Topun assembly that people will be excited to work with. Then for the LCS side, I think, but that there's players there. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Right, but just for the academy side, right, is to have players to say that these are players that people will be excited to work with in the future, so that they can put up performances. People can look at it and say that these are assets. These wouldn't just be LCS ready players. These would be assets to teams. So they'll be able to put up strong performances. They're able to more than just serve their role in terms of executing the strategy that's placed before them. I think that's what success is looking like for us.
And what about for yourself? Yeah. What about yourself personally by the end of 2021? Like, what do you want to have achieved for yourself and like who you are as a coach, maybe even who you are as a person over the next year?
What do I want to achieve for myself? Now, this is one of those very deep philosophical questions, right? Like, who are you? No, who are you really?
Well, what do you got?
I
Give
think
us something.
it's like a proof of concept, right? Like for myself, this is the first time that I'm actually getting to continue my work with some of the players that I've worked with in the past. I've most of the time I come in, I'm there to solve problems, give players turn teams around in the immediate future, or I'm there as a more secondary consulting kind of like advisory role, right? This is the first time I'm coming in. I'm getting to continue my work with some of the players that I worked with before. This is the first time I've actually gotten to scout players and say that this is the type of players that I would like to do develop. So for me, it's kind of like a proof of concept as well to show that what I have works, not just at a okay, we have these problems and let's bring Jensen in to solve them kind of thing, right? I think that definitely be able to hitting the team metrics is going to be my metrics as well, to show that when it comes to developing players. So I haven't had the chance to really talk about my method of like developing players individually, right? I've kind of like talked about like the strategic aspects of things, but to be able to show that I can develop players on an individual level, even in the West, if over a longer period of time, is something that would look like success for me, because this would be me challenging existing notions about what development is like, and it's me showing that my lived experiences do add up, right? And I'm not just constantly being gaslighted, right?
Yeah, and if you have some more things you want to say about your approach to developing players, like go for it. You've got the floor and you've got some time here.
Sure. I think I kind of like mentioned some of it, like looking at what the profile's like, doing a projection, and then working with them on a day-to-day basis. There has to be some level of individual coaching involved. One-on-ones are going to be a big part of it, knowing the four domains like knowledge, making sure that the outgame performance aspects are accounted for as well. It's easier if you ask questions.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of that. And again, if there are certain angles that people have specific questions about, hit Jensen up on Twitter and stuff. Sure, and I'm sure he'd be happy to talk about it some more. To kind of bring us to the finish line here, we'll take some listener questions. So we've got one that was submitted, and typically in advance, I put up a post on Patreon a couple days in advance, so you can always go to patreon.com/oracleselixir and submit questions there. And we've got one from SpaceAlpaca, who says, with both Immortals rosters having so many rookies, is the plan to rotate them and give multiple rookies LCS experience? And does that even work in a game that is so dependent on team synergy?
Well, I cannot directly answer the question, right? But there is always a possibility, right? Like there's always a possibility of anything happening, and I think that this was answered earlier in the show where we talked about there being a high level of coordination between the main team and the academy team, so that if need be, such a rotation can happen. But I wouldn't say it's not my position to say if that's the plan. It's just that I think there's something that I can add on to that, right? That my primary goal here is to be in charge of developing players and helping players solve problems, right? When it comes to the big picture strategic aspect of what's going to be happening for Immortals in terms of like the strategy they're playing, the players they're using, that's the call of Giloto to make.
Sure. Yeah, no, that I think preparing for that as a possibility is something you probably always want to be doing. But there's a difference between that and coming in and saying we intentionally know that we are going to be, swapping players up and down over the course of the year. I think there have been a few teams in the LCS in the past who have made that an explicit intention that we do expect, we're treating this kind of as a 10-man roster in any given week. We do think that we have the option to move the players up and down. I think most of the time you're not going to have teams coming in and saying that we're going to do that, and there are some downsides to making that your clear intention, right? I think people talk about having the academy players push the LCS players and threaten their jobs that they feel like they have to work harder, right? But that can come with downsides where maybe the security, and I think it probably depends on the individual person, the individual player, whether the security is more valuable to helping you be confident versus the push of helping you feel the need to work harder, right? And I'm sure that, and maybe you can support whether you feel the same way about that, but I'm sure it depends mostly on the individuals involved, right?
I think there's advantages and disadvantages to having such a clear level of parity, right, between the academy, between the second and then the first team, right? When you have a high level of parity, it means that intra-team practice becomes very valuable. And I think that in a region like any, where your scrim partners are very limited, and you always have to be worried about concern with the quality of scrim practice, or the security of your scrim information as well. Not to say that people leak it, right? But you have only that limited number of people, and you don't really know who you're going to be facing at any point of time. So if you want to practice specific strategies, and you want to be 100% sure that these things don't get out there, then having a strong roster parity gives you very strong training partners, gives you strategic flexibility in terms of preparation as well. Right. So those are some of the upsides.
Cool. So Genesis wants to know, how do you approach academy matches in the sense of, is it acceptable to play to improve like you might in scrims, or at the academy level, are you always playing to win? Is that always the number one priority?
You are always playing to win, right? But I do believe here the question is, do you let's say I think at academy level, playing a scaling way is the easiest way to win, right? But it doesn't mean that if I'm picking Renekton, it doesn't mean that I'm playing to lose. But that's a higher bar of execution that you're looking for, right? So would it be that we just pick Azir, Yuumi, and Astra every single game? I don't think we will be doing that unless it's an interesting angle for us to work with. But like I said, there's three aspects of the game that we're trying to develop, and I think that we will want to showcase a wide variety of things to enable players to get experience, like taking on various roles. Be it as the anchor point, be it as the focal point, and show strategic depth as well across the board in the academy itself. So I would say that it's not just playing to improve, right? It's more of like playing to showcase what we've got. Playing to improve is for scrims. For stage is playing to win, and at the same time showcasing what you've got. And then between that's the balance of like, okay, like picking the scaling composition will tend to yield the higher win rate, especially at a lower level of play, because you have a much wider margin for error. But I'm not a fan of doing that, especially at the academy level.
Sure. And I think the last one we'll take for now is from OPTSM fan. Are there any drills that you've come across that help you get your concepts across or help your players improve?
Drills that I come across that help my players get concepts right. It's more of like VOD reviews, like taking out stills from certain games and then or pausing the game at a certain point and replaying it, and then getting them to go through the communications as to what's happening over here. Right? I wouldn't say that there's a specific drill like you have in sports where you start the day off like with a set of drills like you have to jump, like do the rope ladder and that kind of stuff. Uh, I'm not sure if I get the question completely.
Yeah, I
Right?
guess like there isn't really the opportunity to set up a drill in League of Legends, right? You can't set up a physical scenario and then play it out over and over and over again.
You can
So I
do
guess
blitz scrims, right? You can do blitz scrims, right? Like,
yeah, to
which
some
is
extent.
something that we have done in the past. Like, if you're practicing a very specific level one, so you're practicing very specific scenarios. Like, let's say that we want to work on ways that we can double crap the opponent, right? So this is a jungle centric meta, and we are just trying to work on securing double crap for our jungler, and we're going to draft like pushing lanes and what are the things that we can do to either attack the opponent level one. And I'm not sure if that counts as a drill or if that counts as like blitz scrims, right? So
Yeah.
is blitz scrim a form of drill in itself?
Yeah, but and so I guess maybe to extend the question a little bit then. So I think there are certain coaching tools that are pretty common and maybe if there's anything that would go beyond this. So you have obviously scrims. You play out, full games against an opponent. You have VOD review where you watch your own games or someone else's games and you talk through them and kind of highlight certain moments and try to learn from what you're seeing on the screen. And what are a couple of other techniques that you use? I guess you also mentioned lectures, like bringing somebody through a presentation or something like that, and saying, "Here's a concept, and we're going to teach it," like you would at school. Are there any kind of techniques beyond that coaches should be paying attention to, or aspiring coaches?
Uh, I actually do have one, right? And I think that this comes close to being a drill, right? Where I do a visualization exercise with players, and this is something that I found to be very useful. Where what I do is that I just ask them to visualize the game out in their head, and then just picture the minimap in their mind, and we say that okay, so you're spawning, you're walking out of base, what are you thinking about, right? And I'll give them the bam pick at the start of things, right? So we simulate the moment the champions are locked in. What are you communicating? The moment you spawn in the game, what are you doing, right? This is the first wave. How do you play the first wave? This is the second wave. How do you play the second wave? This is the third wave. How do you play the third wave? And then, I do it wave by wave to a certain point, like at least
Mm-hmm.
for the first 7 waves or so. Then when it comes, then we talk about broader concepts, right? Like this is the scenario. Your sightings are here. What are you supposed to be doing now? So it's more of a mental exercise to help them visualize what's happening in the game, and then they have the time to go through the decisions and kind of ingrain the things that they've been learning into and draw the proper associations to make the right decisions when it comes to the actual match itself, where there's a lot more pressure. And it takes the focus away from having to make an immediate decision, whereas there's a lot of things happening on your screen at once, so it's easy for you to get
Yeah.
distracted sometimes. So this exercise is something that I found to be useful. Once again, not sure if you call that a drill.
Yeah, not really. It's I guess visualization or maybe kind of a little bit of role playing. And we've actually done this something kind of similar to that a little bit on Twitter now and then with I post like analyst challenges. I can't say it for some reason. I'd post a screenshot of a game state or a short video clip of a game state and then say, okay, what do you do next? What are you thinking about? And kind of help people get into that mindset and see. It's often quite difficult, right? Right? It's pretty easy to sit back and go, oh, obviously they should have done this after it's already happened, but to think in advance and what should you be thinking about, what are the intentions, stuff like that is definitely a great way to learn, whether you're a player or just somebody who wants to kind of understand the game better. Great. So yeah, that was all really, really interesting. Appreciate you being here, Jensen. What's the best way for people to follow your work and to kind of get to know more about you and your team over the coming season?
I think the best way would be, I would say, follow me on Twitter, right?
Yeah. And
So at Jensen Goh LLL, I've
yeah,
changed it. Used to be something else. Now I'm just Jensen Goh. Jensen Goh League of LLL for League of Legends,
yeah,
right?
we'll
Go
put
with
the
H at the end of it.
yeah, we'll put the link for that in the show notes so to make it really possible you can find that, and also your YouTube channel and other things with that. So people can definitely keep up with what Jensen is doing, and he's one of the more open coaches and more approachable, I would say, from those in the scene that you could definitely talk to. So make sure to check that out. You can support the True Sight podcast at patreon.com/OraclesElixir. You can subscribe on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, as well as anchor.fm/TrueSight. And you should definitely check out the Oracle's Elixir Discord server to talk LOL esports, data science, and a lot of other topics. Links for those as well are all going to be in the show notes. This has been the TrueSight podcast with Jensen Goh, the coach of Immortals Academy, and I'm Tim Sevenhuisen. Thanks for listening.